It's almost July and we're still planting out in the high tunnel. Let's go. Hey friends, it's Kendall, your joyful farmer. I'm here in the high tunnel today. It's already like 99 degrees in here and it's 9 a.m. So it gets pretty hot in here pretty quick, even with the fans and ventilation. But I've got some plants that are starting to peter out and stop producing, and some of them are just crunchy and sad looking. So I'm gonna walk you through some of the plants that I have now and some plants that I'm replacing, and kind of my mindset and my thought process when I'm deciding what to do next. The high tunnel, even with the shade cloth and the exhaust fans and the ventilation on 3 sides with the insect netting, still gets to be up to 110, even 115 degrees at moments. So it's been really interesting to see which plants can handle the triple-digit heat and which ones are starting to peter out. Some of these plants I've had growing since April, even March, and we're approaching the end of June, so the temperatures are only going to get hotter through July and August. Now, plants go through a natural life cycle. They all start as small plants, they grow larger, and then they attempt to reproduce themselves. In conjunction with the seasons, plants grow, they sometimes produce a lot, and then they also will wither and die. Now, the fact that plants want to reproduce themselves is great for us because that means that they multiply, and that also means that we get great things like fruit off of plants. But every plant has its season. All good things must come to an end, even if they just pause for the winter. So in this case, I've got all of these tomato and cucumber plants that have reached kind of the end maximum capacity of what they're going to produce in this particular situation. When things start to come to an end, I don't freak out. Yes, I'm a little sad that the plants are done producing for me, but it's just time to think about what I'm going to be sowing next. Some things that are still growing and producing and flourishing in here are the zucchini, the scallop squash, the celosia and zinnias are doing okay. The zinnias are getting a little bit big, and so at some point I'll probably have to pull them. The peppers are just starting to set a whole bunch of pods, and so we'll have a whole lot of peppers here soon. Luke had to come check out what's going on, of course. The eucalyptus is still growing strong. It doesn't seem to mind the heat. I have some snapdragons that finished blooming. And the dahlias are doing pretty well in here too. They're still continuing to produce blooms and they're producing new green foliage. I was afraid that the grasshopper damage and the spider mites that were starting to creep in on the dahlias would be too much for them. But I've really been working on that, so it looks like they're gonna continue to produce in the high tunnel, even with the high temperatures in here. I've been really impressed with the way the dahlias have continued to grow. I started them from seed and I transplanted some. There were none that started from tubers over there, and they're all doing really, really well. I have a couple of dahlias that I started from tubers, and the main stalk, it looked like, had kind of petered out on most of them, but they've got some new growth going, even with the high temperatures. He's such a mama's boy, aren't you? The tomatoes are mostly indeterminate tomatoes, and they're trellised vertically. They've just now stopped setting fruit, most of them. There are a couple plants that I think might be able to continue producing through the triple-digit heat, but most of them have stopped setting fruit altogether. So how can you tell if your tomato plants aren't producing? If you look toward the top of the plant and you see these little brown crunchy blossoms, those are the ones that couldn't take the heat. And the cucumbers have just hit a point where they've had some spider mite damage. The plants are getting older. I've let some of the cucumbers ripen a little bit too much on the vines, and so those plants are kind of ending their own life cycle. I also have some onions and kale that have not bolted in here, and there is some basil that's doing great, of course. So when you're thinking about what to do when your plants start to peter out and fade in their production, you got to think about a few things. You can consider the number of frost-free days that you have left in your growing season. For me, our first average annual frost date is around November 12th, and so that leaves me 138 days as of today in that frost-free growing season. This will help you in determining which frost-tender plants you can start during the summer. Just look for the days to maturity on the varieties. I like to be sure that I have at least a few weeks of a buffer between when a plant is mature and when the first freeze will likely hit, so that I can get a good amount of food from the plant before I lose it to a freeze. But as a general rule of thumb, that's a good thing to consider. It's also good to consider your climate and what the temperatures are. What's going to grow right now in your area? Here in North Texas, we're going to look for a lot of crops that can tolerate heat and even drought because water gets expensive. So some things that I've been working on planting out in the high tunnel, I've got some sunflowers that I both transplanted and I started from seed. I direct sowed sunflowers in here. If pest pressure is especially high in your area in the summers, like if you have grasshoppers like we do, one grasshopper in 30 minutes could wipe out all of my sunflower seedlings. So on the seedlings that are becoming baby plants, I'm sprinkling diatomaceous earth to make sure that the grasshoppers don't eat them and just to keep other pests off of them. The other challenge with direct sowing is making sure that you have enough water in the soil so that there's moisture for the seeds to germinate. In addition to the sunflowers that I started, I have started some cucumber from seed. I went ahead and I just put cucumber seeds all along where the old plants are. So what I'll do is I will cut off the plants at the base and I will have a new plant just getting started and ready to grow up the trellis again. I think some of them have been eaten by grasshoppers, so I do need to go in and sow some more, and I'll be a little bit more careful to keep that diatomaceous earth sprinkled on them to keep the grasshoppers from eating them. So what I'm going to do with the tomatoes is I'm going to try 3 different methods for starting fall tomatoes. One of them is just to take the old plants that I have, clip them off at the base, and leave the new leafy green growth that's starting to grow from the base. Another method is I'm going to root some suckers. So I'm going to take suckers from plants. Here's one right here. I'm going to root them in water and then I'll plant them out. And then I'll also have the ones that I start from seed. So I'm going to test all 3 of those methods and see if there's a difference as far as production and flavor. I might start some more zucchini and squash from seed. Right now, these plants are actually still producing. The squash bugs have not gotten them yet. My mom has been especially diligent coming out here and checking for squash bugs and taking care of eggs and things. So we're really low in the squash bug population out here in the high tunnel right now, which is amazing. Hopefully these plants will be able to get a little bit more out of them. But even if I wait until August, I've still got enough days. We also have some dino kale that's still continuing to grow. The cabbage moths continue to lay their eggs on the new growth, and so I don't have a whole lot of really nice looking leaves on them, but they're continuing to grow. So if I can get a handle on the population of the moths in here, I think they'll do really well in the fall. The basil I'm just continuing to prune the flowers off of so that it continues to bush and grow. So before it gets even hotter in here, I'm gonna go ahead and direct sow some bean seeds out back by the peppers where the cilantro used to be. The cilantro's gone now, so I think it'll be a perfect little spot to put in some bush beans. So I have these provider bush bean seeds that I soaked overnight. I'm just gonna sow them 2 to 4 inches apart here down this row right in front of the peppers. Their optimum soil temperature for germination is 86 degrees and the soil is 85 degrees. So they should do really well. Watered them in pretty well. They should germinate over the next few days, and I'll just try to keep the soil moist until then. So thanks for joining me today. I wish you joy on your journey, and I'll see you next time.